Selamat petang, selamat sore, good afternoon everybody. I'm afraid I'm going to have to begin with a confession, because I was going to tell you a little bit about September the 27th, but now of course you all know about September the 27th, because that works, that was Earth Overshoot Day. So I really should have spoken to Jonathan Porritt a little bit before I began this, but that's okay, because instead I can now ask you a question. Please put up your hand if you can tell me what Earth Overshoot Day means. Okay, terrific. A lot of hands going up here, so that's great, because what that means is, as I suspected, Jonathan Porritt has done a magnificent job of explaining to you about what a bad thing it is to eat into natural capital. So I can now move straight on to the investment perspective, which is really straightforward. Because the investment perspective on eating into your capital is that it makes no sense at all. As investors, we like to protect and enhance our capital to generate income in the future that can create sustainable wealth. And investors are increasingly aware of the linkages between natural capital, environmental, social, governance issues, which we can collectively talk about as being sustainability and long-term financial results. The speed at which this awareness has arisen in the past few years is remarkable. And I'd like to give you a couple of examples, the first one being very much at a business level. The business I'd like to talk to you about is a company called Walmart, and I think it's a company you will all be familiar with because it is the world's largest retailing company. And for many years, from a financial perspective, it was the darling of the stock market. It produced wonderful returns. That was right up until about end of 2002. And they did this with what we call their big box format. They put these big structures into communities without too much regard to the communities in which they went, without too much regard to their environmental footprint. Their aim was to source the lowest cost products from around the world, to be the low-cost provider. And in doing that, they didn't want to pay their workers very much at all. Certainly didn't provide health insurance, things like that. In fact, they even prohibited their members from joining unions. And that all worked for them for quite a while. But if you were to do an experiment, you should look at the shareholder returns for Walmart from the end of 2002 to today, and you will see that they have quite significantly underperformed their major competitors. And I put it to you that this company lost its social license to operate. For example, the state of Maryland in the United States passed a law which effectively prohibited Walmart from opening any new stores in that state. The Norwegian pension fund, one of the largest pension funds in the world, has explicitly excluded Walmart from its investment universe, thus impacting its access to capital. And so I put it to you then that this license to operate, which comes from your employees, your customers, the regulators and your shareholders, is critical to business success. And the good news for Walmart is that their management have now realized that and are working hard to change that. In fact, from an environmental perspective, they're arguably doing now more than any other retailer in the world, though they still have a lot of way to go, perhaps on the social side and some of their employment issues, but they are working on them, and that will be important to their recovery from a financial sense. So importantly then, sustainability matters to business success, and if it matters to business, then it matters to us as investors. So let me now talk to you about another very important trend from the investment perspective. In 2005, a subgroup in the United Nations started working on what today are called the Principles for Responsible Investment. There are actually 6 of these principles, and I'm really only going to talk to you about the first 2 because I think you'll get an idea here. Principle 1, we will incorporate ESG issues. This is environmental, social, governance issues, shorthand, and again, think of that as sustainability, into investment analysis and decision-making processes. Number 2, we will be active owners in the companies we invest and incorporate ESG issues into our ownership policies and practices. So that's about talking about these issues with our investee companies to encourage them down this direction. Now, when these principles were first formed and signed up to, back in 2006, there were 71 signatories. Today, only 5 years later, there are 944 signatories, and collectively, these institutions who have signed up to these principles are responsible for managing over $30 trillion US in assets, which is equivalent to about 20% of the world's capital. And with that sort of growth rate, I put it to you that in the next few years that will be dramatically increased. And so this has important implications then for any organisation or individual seeking access to capital. It means then that organisations must be aware of the sustainability challenges which they face in their industry, be thinking about them and have strategies to deal with them. Now, these sustainability criteria vary from industry to industry. For example, in the healthcare industry, issues such as ethical selling practices and how a company conducts its clinical trials are issues which we at Generation Investment Management look at very closely in determining the sustainability of companies that are in that industry. But today, of course, we're here to talk about the palm oil industry. And I think nobody knows better the sustainability challenges facing this industry than the people here in this room. We all know about the carbon emissions, the potential destruction of high conservation value areas, treatment of indigenous local workers. The list goes on. Now, investors then have started to come together as a group because within the UNPRI signatory group, there are many investors invested into palm oil. And these investors started to come together just about a year ago, and these are just some of them on this group. It's actually, again, a growing list, and I'd like to thank Darryl Weber for his help in growing this list. He kindly attended a major investment conference in Paris a couple of months ago, and it's really helped us to spread the word amongst the global investment community. So the investors have come together to examine sustainability criteria in this industry and what that means for our investments in this industry. And the good news is that when we started to do this, we found a lot of very important work had been done already. So, for example, I had the great privilege of attending the Roundtable of Sustainable Palm Oil RT8 in Jakarta last year, and was very impressed by the number of committed and talented people who have worked so hard to define these principles and criteria for the industry. And so we as a group then, having learnt more about this, have decided that that's exactly what we want to support in the investments that we are making across the value chain in the palm oil industry. And we are invested, of course, from the buying community through the plantations and the producers. On the buyer side, we've been delighted with some of the work that's been done by the buyers who have made commitments, as we all know. But as we talk to our investee companies about these commitments, we are keen to see greater transparency, a greater orderly approach to meeting those commitments, not leaving this to the last minute, and also understanding that transition from green palm to segregated supply. Then, of course, there are organisations who haven't yet joined up or made those commitments, and we've started discussions with those companies as well, particularly in the area of China and India, where these are, we've heard, yet to materialise. But these companies too will face the issue of access to capital, and investors will be continuing to talk to them about these areas. We're also invested in the producers and the plantation owners, and again we're very excited to see the number of our investee companies who have signed up to commitments, but again these commitments must be kept to. We all know that information travels at the speed of light, and when a commitment is breached and it results in headlines and graphic images around the world that create negative images for promoting sustainable palm oil, then this has a very poor impact on one of the key stakeholder groups in parts of the world, on the consumers. And in fact, I've already been talking to some companies today who are quite concerned about these impacts, and are thinking about, well, how can we create our products without using palm oil? So clearly we need to make sure that we address these issues. Our investee companies need to keep their commitments in order to protect our investments. So in conclusion, we in the Sustainable Palm Oil Investor Working Group are very much looking forward to increasing this dialogue that we're having with our investment companies throughout the value chain. And we do this because for us, sustainability is about increasing our long-term investments and understanding the natural capital on which they are based. We're also very much aware that palm oil has played a huge role in bringing people out of poverty in countries and where this has become a major crop. But we also believe that the needs of people within the industry must be balanced with the broader needs of the environmental needs and social needs of the broader population. So sustainability for us as investors then is about wealth creation. But there is an important distinction. It is not about short-term wealth creation for the few. It is about long-term wealth creation for the many.
Thank you very much, Mark.